It is December 3rd, 2025, and reports are now saying that Trump spoke on the phone with Maduro for just 15 minutes, in which he threatened the Venezuelan president and told him that he and his family have just 1 week to flee the country. That deadline would have been last Friday, the same day that Trump declared on social media that Venezuela's airspace should be considered closed in its entirety. So, are we looking at the possibility of the U.S. carrying out land strikes on Venezuela, even going further than that, and what should we also be keeping an eye on as we have the reports that there was no major breakthrough when Russian President Putin sat down with a delegation from the US in Moscow? Well, we got into all of that and more with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is retired U.S. Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a defense and foreign policy analyst and former Pentagon advisor. Colonel Macgregor, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Sure, of course.
Great to have you on the show. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, and I want to start off with Venezuela. As you have this increased U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean, you have Reuters reporting that President Trump spoke to President Nicolas Maduro on the phone for about just 15 minutes on November 21st and told him that he and his family had 1 week to flee the country. That deadline would have ended last Friday when Trump, of course, declared on social media that Venezuela's airspace was to be considered closed. So, what are your concerns for how close we could be to land strikes on Venezuela?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the massive buildup has committed us to action. I mean, we've reached the point very nearly of no return. It's like the Normandy invasion. You know, you have this enormous buildup of forces. The weather isn't perfect. You have a short window in which you can land and do something. So Eisenhower said, execute. And I think at this point, you have a similar situation with President Trump. I think it's a very bad idea. I wouldn't do it. But given the numbers of forces that are there right now, if you don't move them soon, they'll lose their edge because you can only maintain yourself in a posture of readiness for so long before you begin to relax, become tired. People begin to say, what are we doing here? And so forth. So I suspect we're close to execution.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring that up because as I'm watching everything unfold in the Caribbean, I'm sitting here going, okay, we've got at least 11 warships, including the USS Gerald R. Ford in the region, along with an estimated 15,000 troops. That makes it seem like something's going to happen, right? The Trump administration wouldn't just send over all of these reinforcements to then go back home. But when it comes to a possible land strike, what do you think that we could be looking at here? Are we talking about just an attempted decapitation strike? Are they going after military sites, or do they even know at this point?
Oh, I think they know. Undoubtedly, they have target lists, and they have tried to identify all the potential air and missile defense sites, along with accompanying radars. We have evidence that the Russians have provided, in addition to air and missile defense, also strike weapons, various kinds of theater ballistic missiles, short range ballistic missiles, probably short range more than anything else, that could conceivably be launched at some of the ships at sea if we attack. So I'm sure that someone is looking at all of it and trying to come up with a scenario where we launch enough strikes from the air that we have reasonable confidence that we can land forces without losing a lot of people in the process. Remember, if you're sitting with the Marines offshore, they're probably tasked with seizing something like the international airport, which is right on the coast. That would not be difficult to do. But what you don't want to happen is large numbers of Marines and helicopters flying to the airport who are suddenly destroyed in the air. In other words, what you want to avoid is a mass casualty exercise early on in the operation, because that could sabotage it. One of the things that nobody ever talks about, but it's very important, is what is the tolerance for human losses? How many soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines are we prepared to lose in this operation? You always have that. That's discussed. When we went into action back in 91, they estimated roughly a company-size element per brigade. That meant roughly 150 to 200 men per brigade. That means probably 600 to 800 casualties per division size formation or whatever. They come up with these numbers. There are different analytical models that help you do this. But the point is, I don't know what that is for this operation. But I do know the polls suggested 70% of the American population, when asked, said it's probably not a good idea to go to Venezuela. So I'm sure that has an impact.
I would hope so, right? You look at the American public, they just voted in this guy who said no new wars, and then here he is gearing up for some sort of new war. And on top of that, you also have the fact that the US has already been carrying out attacks in the Caribbean, killing dozens of individuals, claiming that they are alleged narco terrorists. And now Defense Secretary, or I guess Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, may be getting himself into some trouble as he is claiming that he wasn't in the room when the order was given to launch a second strike that killed the survivors on an alleged drug boat back on the 2nd of September. So, how do you view the position that the Trump administration is in when they're carrying out these attacks? And could they be considered as war crimes?
Well, the killings that are involved with these various boats that we've sunk, those are extrajudicial killings. There's no question about it. We have no declaration of war. As far as I know, President Trump has not gone to Congress and asked for any sort of authorization. He apparently seems to think he doesn't need it. His justification, of course, is we're killing drugs. Every boat that we sink saves 25,000 lives. It's all nonsense, of course. All you have to do is go to the Department of, or the Drug and Enforcement Agency, look at the reports that are posted, and you'll find out that less than 4% of the so-called drugs, illegal drugs, are coming out of Venezuela. Most of those consist of cocaine, tends to go to West Africa or Europe. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter or we shouldn't be concerned. What I'm trying to say is that it's not quite what it's being portrayed as. I think everyone has concluded that it's about resources, number one, access to oil and gas, gold mines, emeralds, lithium, rare earths, these kinds of things. But, frankly, you don't need to go to war for that. You could have made an agreement. The problem is we want absolute obedience out of Venezuela, which means we don't want them doing business with anybody we don't like. And right now they're doing business with Russia, to a lesser extent China and Iran and others. We think this is our hemisphere, and we're not going to tolerate that sort of thing. So we want a government in there that's going to do as we wish. It's that simple. Problem is, Venezuela has 30 million people in it. It's the size of France, Germany, and Austria together. This is not an easy chunk of territory to swallow. You've got Amazonian jungle for much of the terrain, large mountains, particularly on the Colombian border. And you have no certainty of being able to identify all the potential threats. And increasingly, we're seeing a lot of evidence that even in areas like Colombia, where there are people that don't like the Venezuelans and the Venezuelans that don't like the Colombians, there's a willingness now to cooperate, because this could turn into a Latino rallying cause against the evil, white Yankee from North America, which is kind of the sort of thing you really want to avoid if you have any brains. We don't want to do that. I mean, it's the last thing in the world that you want. But again, this is where we are. And I think, unfortunately, unless he has a sudden come to Jesus moment and says, on second thought, I had a conversation with Mr. Maduro, I'm going to take his offer. We're going to stand down and work our way through this. Thank you very much. I think he could do it. I think it would be a wise move, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah, it's very concerning as you're watching this build up and hearing these reports of just a 15-minute call. I do want to bring up the American people's appetite for all of this, because as you were talking about earlier, right, the possibility of losing American troops in some sort of operation, let's say they go in, they take the airport off the coast, well, then you're still looking at a much more involved war that now the US military is getting involved in. Now you've got American soldiers coming home in body bags. When you look at the American people and how much they're willing to put up with, I mean, the Trump administration can tell us all day long it's about stopping illegal drug trafficking, but do you see Americans being willing to get into another endless war?
Well, I think the easy answer is no. However, there's a lot of experience in the Department of Defense, or now the Department of War once again, that if you can minimize your losses, you probably can get away with a great deal. In other words, what you don't want to do is awaken the beast. The beast is the American electorate. If you take 50 or 60 wounded, 5 or 10 killed on the first day, everyone will say, oh, well, that's unfortunate. But if you lose 300 or 400 in a day and they're killed, then everybody wakes up and says, wait a minute, we didn't sign on for this. That's too many. What are you doing? So the game is, first of all, pulverize Venezuela into submission from the air or from the sea with missiles. Pulverize in the sense that you eliminate, hopefully, all of their military capability or most of it. They don't have that much. It's a very large area and you can disperse it and it can be dangerous as a result. You try to do that. Then if you go in, you want to try to avoid losses that you might otherwise take with an unhappy population that really doesn't care to be occupied by a large group of Yankees from North America. So, the answer to your question, if you don't lose very many up front and you can minimize the losses that you do take on a daily or weekly basis, you can probably get away with it for a while. But then this is not the only game in town. We've got problems in the Middle East. That war is not over. The situation in Ukraine is probably nearing an end simply because there aren't very many Ukrainians left to fight. They're running out of airspeed and altitude. But there's no certainty that you can avoid a fiscal crisis. Our financial condition is very fragile. The economy is not good, contrary to what the president keeps saying, and Americans are not doing well. So you have to wrap all of it together. You can't see everything in isolation. If we were only looking at Venezuela, we had nothing going in the Middle East, nothing going in Eastern Europe, that would be a different problem. But it's not. It's part of a much larger global problem that confronts us right
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to keep in mind as you're watching this. It can't just be in isolation. And while I have you here, I do want to bring up the situation when it comes to tensions between the US and Russia, because we, of course, know that Russian President Putin met with US envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son in law, Jared Kushner, in Moscow on Tuesday. And not only did it not lead to a major breakthrough from everything we've heard, but reports say that Witkoff and Kushner canceled what was supposed to be their follow up meeting with Zelensky and are headed back home. So, how do you view the state of talks there? Is there a potential for a possible deal, or is the war in Ukraine more likely to be decided on the battlefield?
Well, I think the words that were used by the delegation were we had very good talks, but much more work needs to be done. That was the sort of initial comment. That what that means is this went nowhere. I mean, in diplomatic parlance, it's a dead end. And now the fact that they're headed back and they're not bothering with Ukraine indicates that they probably briefed the president. The president said, "Okay, give my best to Mr. Putin. Come home. There's no point in persisting in this." I hope. I think what those two men went to Moscow to do really had less to do with Ukraine and much more to do with President Trump. Now, what do I mean by that? I think President Trump wants a good optical illusion. What is a good optical illusion? It's a setting where he and Putin are photographed agreeing to something that will end the conflict so that he can take credit for having brought peace to Ukraine in, what is it, the 19th war that he's ended, whatever. That failed. Now, that's not because President Putin would not like to throw him a bone. I'm sure he would. Here, Donald, here's a bone for you. Thanks so much. We want to work with you because the Russians want to restore normal relations with us. I think President Trump would like to restore normal relations with Moscow, but he's surrounded by people who want perpetual hatred of Russia, just as they want perpetual war in the Middle East against everyone in the region that doesn't like Israel. And they're also enthusiastic about going after Venezuela because they've made the serious mistake of doing business with Iran, which, after all, is an existential threat to Israel. So the sort of neoconservative Zionist clique that currently controls your government is all in for these conflicts. It's very difficult for him, given that they're his donors. When you look at Witkoff and Kushner, they represent the donors. They are part of the cabal. So I think he's done what he in his mind believes he can do, and he's pulled out. Now the danger here is, of course, the Europeans and the Ukrainian. When I hate to say Ukrainians because I don't think this regime anymore represents Ukraine in the slightest sense of the word. I think they're murdered millions of Ukrainians. They're criminals. But I think the European globalists that don't represent their populations and Zelensky and his friends all have an interest in maintaining the conflict. Once that conflict ends, what do you do if you're Starmer, Macron, and Merz? You have no legs to stand on. You've lied to everybody repeatedly about the great danger that Russia presents. If you look at Germany right now, Germany and France and England are all in very, very bad shape. Not just economically, but domestically. Population is furious. You rarely see Germans in great numbers take to the streets, which has happened in Berlin and around the country. They only become aggravated under the most serious circumstances. The Germans want Merz gone. They hate this government. And if you look at the alternative platform that's under serious consideration that could easily be substituted for what is there now, what does it mean? Well, it means that we're going to restore relations with Russia. We want to get back to business as usual with the Russians. We are going to get out of NATO, and we don't like the EU. Well, put that together, and that is the complete disintegration of everything that everybody for the last 80 years is accustomed to. And that has worked very much, we think, to our advantage. President Trump would have been a very smart man to help us disengage from all of this, recognizing the handwritings on the wall. That was on the wall back in 2016. But he wasn't able to do it, and he can't do it right now. Why? He's constrained by donors.
Yeah, and as you're watching all of this play out, right, you're looking at the Trump administration, and I'm with you. You're going, okay, wouldn't the most logical thing be to try to work with Russia to figure out what deals can we make? How can we have a mutually beneficial relationship? And especially as you pay attention to what's happening on the battlefield right now, because I know that Russian officials confirmed this week that the Russian military has taken control of several key frontline cities, including Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region and Kupiansk and Volchansk in the Kharkov region. Yet the West is still claiming that's not the case. I mean, I see articles every day saying that all of these facts being presented by Russia are up for debate, and we just watch the West continue to be in this delusional state, and I guess to hope that the public is going to be on board with it. What does that mean for the West when our officials are not truly taking reality into account and truly taking things seriously and figuring out, okay, what is the best way to end this war? Because we're not going to win it.
Well, two things. First of all, Reuters published an article very recently about 11 Ukrainians. It's kind of a band of brothers in the Ukrainian military. And it follows these 11 Ukrainian soldiers through their experience. At the end of the process, there are only two left alive, and those two deserted. Now, whether or not anybody else is alive, they're so badly wounded and so utterly destroyed as human beings. They have no chance of ever doing anything normally for the rest of their lives. So I think the truth is out there if you're willing to look at it and see it. And that kind of article is worth its weight in gold because it's a glimpse of reality. It's not a glimpse for you and me or for Larry Wilkerson or any number of people that are out there been talking about this for 3 years. But most Americans are not accustomed to this. It's a very sobering thing. So I hope a lot of Americans will look at that. Beyond that, the government is not really interested in the American people and what it thinks any more than the globalist governments in Europe are interested in the American people or interested in the European peoples and what they think. They have an agenda. Their agenda is to loot the society for all the money they can get out of it. And they have lots of accomplices in the Senate and the House. Everybody is there to enrich themselves. Why else do you go into politics? This is something that most Americans haven't figured out. This is something that's been true in Latin America or the Middle East, much of Asia forever. Why do you become a policeman? Well, if you become a policeman, you can extract money from your victims. Who are your victims? People that you pull over for a parking ticket or who commit some crime and are unfortunately discovered in the process, and you blackmail them. You extract cash from them. That's why people become policemen. That's why in a place like Iraq or Egypt, everybody wants to be a policeman. Put you in charge. You can take bribes. You can make money. The same thing is true in many of these military establishments in much of the developing world. Well, unfortunately, it's now true for Washington. Now, I'm not saying it was never true in the past, but it's reached the point of absurdity now. Everyone is on the take. Everyone is for sale. It's rare that you see someone like Rand Paul who stands up and says, no, I can't support this. This is a war crime. That's unacceptable. Uh, he's not on the take. He's not being enriched by large donors. In fact, I'm sure he's now a target like Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene was, and others who've said no, thank you. So it's a bad situation. Donald Trump is at severe risk. He may not understand this. He may think that he's invincible, invulnerable, and immune. He's not. He's in a very risky position. Going into Venezuela is a very bad idea. Nothing good will come out of this. No matter how hard he tries to spin it, his donors spin it, and the people in the media that are once again on the take from the donors, they can't spin their way out of this when this happens. This is right on our doorstep.
Yeah, it's very telling the situation that we're in and getting into, and we're watching as the Trump administration is continuing to walk right towards it. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing and continuing to raise awareness about where things are headed all around, whether it's economically or on the foreign policy stage. And I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Retired U.S. Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a defense and foreign policy analyst and former Pentagon advisor. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.